abstinent of marijuana before they're enrolled in the study. That's going to be challenging to find, but we're hoping to find a good mix of vets who are experienced with marijuana, and then the other half who are hopefully naive to marijuana and never tried it. And that way we'll be able to get some more interesting data and correlate that later. But I think that this is some of the challenges that, first of all, recruiting vets who find out that they're going to be on federal government marijuana, they recognize the quality of that, may not be up to the level that they're used to buying from a dispensary or from the black market. So that's already a challenge. These abstinence periods are challenging. These the notion that they can be randomized onto placebo during the first basically 5 weeks of the study is daunting for a lot of vets. So we really need help in persuading vets to participate in this study. You know what, let me just see here if I have, you know what, I don't have, I'm not gonna go too much into this, but I did want to point out, I think many of you have seen that the pharmacopoeia in the US, you know, marijuana was part of that pharmacopoeia, and these were all of the conditions that were listed that were believed to be treated by marijuana. And let me just see here so I think one of the problems that we have is this Controlled Substances Act really created a lot of havoc on the ability to do research on cannabis. And let's see, so you guys have all heard about the scheduling. I don't want to bore you with this because I know that most of you have already heard all the arguments of why marijuana probably doesn't belong in Schedule 1. But I did want to point out something because I don't know if everybody has actually looked at the entire list of the scheduling. So it's really important to be aware that the people who schedule controlled substances in this country are law enforcement. These are not medical people. So law enforcement professionals at the DEA decided that these are where these drugs belong. They have decided whether a drug has medical benefit. They have decided whether it's addictive or not. So here's what why medical people are questioning the validity of the scheduling. Because you look here at Schedule 4, the DEA defines Schedule 4 as having limited abuse potential. And yet you see drugs in here like Xanax, Ativan, Valium, drugs that we all know have huge addiction rates and huge street value. And yet this is how these drugs are scheduled. And here we have marijuana lumped into Schedule 1 with much more toxic drugs, psychedelics, LSD, heroin, MDMA, ecstasy. So I think most people in the medical community would argue that this entire chart needs to be redone by true medical professionals who understand both medical benefit and safety issues with this. But this is what really I think was a big game changer. I think all of you would agree that having Sanjay Gupta weigh in on this discussion, and I'm just going to read this because I think it's really valuable. What he says is basically, I mistakenly believed the DEA when they listed marijuana in Schedule 1. And I said, I believe that they must have had quality reasoning as to why marijuana is in the category of the most dangerous drugs that have no accepted medical use. And then he went on to say, but they didn't have the science to support that claim. And I now know that when it comes to marijuana, none of those things are true, that it doesn't have a high potential for abuse, and there are very legitimate medical applications. We have been terribly and systematically misled for nearly 70 years, and he apologized for his role in that. I think this was a very powerful statement. This is, again, what we're looking at now, where we have, this is the legalization map that actually needs to be updated already because there have been some new medical marijuana states that have come online now. So, but let me just talk a little bit more. Let's see. I had some other slides. I think I ended up giving you guys the wrong presentation, but I'll just tell you that basically at this point, we hope to be underway in the fall with this study. but we don't know, because it all depends on, NIDA, unfortunately, the National Institute on Drug Abuse has a government-enforced monopoly on the only legal supply of marijuana for these studies. So it's a really, surprising situation that I'm here in Colorado, surrounded by all these expert growers who could clearly grow marijuana to spec for a study like this within 3 months, and yet here we are, 16 months later, still waiting for marijuana, still wondering when NIDA will actually deliver the study drug. And so I think all of you have to be concerned about this, and we all need to work together to question why this NIDA monopoly has been perpetuated. Because in Colorado now, taxpayers have made a $9 million investment in trying to do marijuana efficacy research. And yet 3 of these studies are in jeopardy of never being done, because we are reliant, 3 studies have an actual experimental design, like ours is a randomized controlled trial. So we are dependent on NIDA marijuana. And so I think that all Colorado citizens should be urging the federal government to either make this monopoly work. Right now, I would argue that the monopoly is in violation of the Controlled Substances Act, which says that NIDA will provide a continuous and uninterrupted supply, an adequate supply of marijuana. And I would argue that they have not reached that level. I would say 16 months is not a continuous supply, and they certainly don't have an adequate array of strains available. And I think it's time to for the DEA to license new growers to participate in providing study drug. And even, the good news is, even Nora Volkow, the head of NIDA, acknowledged this in a recent hearing, I believe it was a Senate hearing, where she talked about, she admitted that marijuana research has been impeded in this country, and she admitted that we need new growers. And so for all of you in this room who are in the industry or are growers, we all should be talking about this issue and arguing to end the NIDA monopoly and enable multiple growers to start to provide marijuana study drugs, so that we can finally understand what this plant does have to offer, and not just the harmful side effects, but also the efficacy. So let me, if you don't mind, I'd love to take questions. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I really support your efforts. I think the research actually needs to be happening, and I wish we could change it to a schedule 2, and I totally support that. I have questions though about your study design. So these vets that have untreatable PTSD, are they going to have any other treatment other than marijuana?
Great question. Yeah, so the good news is these patients who are screened for this, if they're already on treatment, they will definitely be allowed to stay on treatment. So if they're on meds and they're stable and the dose isn't changing, then they'll be allowed to continue. And we actually encourage them to continue that, because we don't want people to go into withdrawal during their first month or 2 of the study. So, we don't want them to start new treatments during the course of their study time, because then that would possibly confound things. So, yeah.
Because, I totally support it, but I don't think medication is the answer. I've never seen medication cure PTSD. But, things like EMDR, prolonged exposure therapy, are these things that the vets are going to continue doing, or are they not going to do it? And then how do you separate out the effects? So, because that's going to be very, very difficult, and I hate to see vets just thinking that marijuana is the solution.
That's really important. Yeah. So if they're already in any of those, basically those counseling interventions, whether EMDR or any exposure therapy or anything like that, if that's already underway when they're screened, then they will continue that. And they'll be required to continue it at the same level that they're doing it when they enroll in the study. But if they're not on it, then we wouldn't want them to start it halfway through the study. So that's the only guideline we give them. This is a very short, it's only, about 10 weeks. So it's not like, and if they need additional treatment, if there's some, if they have some type of catastrophe during the middle of the study, then they will be unenrolled and obviously allowed to seek out other treatment.
And could they be randomized 2 times?
Yes, they can. So if they're in high THC during the first stage, they could be randomized into high CBD or the 1-to-1, 12.
No, I mean, I'm even wondering the same one. I mean, because if it's triple blinded, how would you know? I mean, it seems to me they could be randomized
To
to high
high
CBD,
THC.
high THC both times.
No, well, that's a good thing, is we have, experts that are in charge of the randomization, that are separate from the study, that will be organizing this in such a way that that can't happen. So that's a good point, but it's an infallible system of preventing that, so that's a good point, but yeah.
I was curious, so what anecdotal evidence did you see when you were treating patients that with PTSD before you started on this clinical trial, and how did that lead you to choose your phase 2 protocols?
Yeah, the anecdotal evidence was pretty compelling. I would say, over time, I mean, like you said, I was very dismissive of their claims initially, so I was so blocked that I couldn't even, hear them out. But slowly I started to begin to document and really ask questions about what strains they were, if they were going through a dispensary, what strains they were accessing, and then we developed the protocol using a lot of that clinical material that I've collected over, and that's how we came up with the different treatment arms and things like that. But it all remains, it's going to be really interesting to see if marijuana proves to be beneficial for PTSD, then which strains might be more optimal, and maybe which strains should be avoided. I think there's a huge concern that the high THC arm could promote psychosis or promote panic disorder in patients who are already vulnerable to that. So that's what we're worried, that's what we hope to really document through this process. Yeah.
Wonderful presentation, thank you. A question also about the study design. You mentioned you have 76 human subjects. You have a 2x2 design with the placebo, so you have your 5 conditions. So my question is, for basically a methodology for how you're going to monitor the dependent variable, is 76 enough for the statistical power? And also, as you look at the 76, it seems that they all have been diagnosed with PTSD. Why would you also not include veterans without PTSD as a control variable?
That's a great point. So first of all, yeah, we were really lucky. We had some of the very top 5 statisticians in the country consulting with us on this, and we worked with the biostatisticians at the FDA for the first 5 months of this process. So what happened was, when we submitted our study design to the FDA, they worked collaboratively with us, and I really want to emphasize this to the group, because I think a lot of folks believe that the FDA is the blockade, but they're not. They're actually, these are physician investigators who want to see whole plant marijuana put through the entire FDA drug development process. So they worked with us to massage the study design and really optimize it, and that's how we ended up with 76. It's actually been much less than that, it was higher than that, and we ended up compromising at this, where we felt we would have enough statistical power to see a statistically significant therapeutic result or not. And then certainly if the data from phase 2 looks respectable, then they may allow us to go to phase 3 after this. So that's the goal, is to put whole plant marijuana through the entire FDA process, and I think that's what I feel I owe these veterans, that I think that we at least should sort out their claims, and not just, the medical community, we're so apt to dismiss any drugs that haven't been approved by the FDA, and that's why this process is so important. This is an early phase drug development trial, phase 2, and then if the data looks good, we go to phase 3, and after phase 3, it is possible that this drug could be on the market, that the FDA would actually, if the data looks compelling enough in phase 3, the FDA would actually approve whole plant marijuana for PTSD. But that's only, it all depends on the data, on the outcome. And then your
The
question.
second part is, for a control variable, why not put veterans, go back to the triple blind study,
Yes.
to really control the effect of cannabis on the actual treatment?
On the illness, and why we're only focusing on vets and not all PTSD sufferers.
No, why don't in the study, as a control variable, have people don't have PTSD, and veterans that don't? In a triple blind study, we don't know, but we actually look at the analysis
I
on the
see what you're
data.
saying. Yeah.
So it's a control variable. Why did you have a
Great point, because the FDA felt that having a placebo control was adequate, and they didn't require that. So we decided, but I suspect that if we are allowed to go to phase 3, that we're gonna get more sophisticated, and you'll see a much more in-depth approach to this. So this is really sort of a first whack at it, where we're trying to see at least if we can discern, does marijuana have true therapeutic benefit of PTSD, and if so, what strains are best, what should be avoided, that kind of thing. So, no, good questions. Yeah.
It's a two-part question. First part, first I'm a Vietnam vet, and we're a lot of veterans, and so how is being stoned a psychoactive condition which allows for measurement of any functioning area? If they're stoned and it's self-reporting, where you have 8 litres, giving them these different instruments, how is that reliable because you get first part?
Right.
And then second part, we just finished this Vietnam Veterans Appreciation thing this past weekend here in Pueblo. So we know dozens of Vietnam vets who took marijuana most of their life, and drugs, and they'll report that marijuana doesn't help with PTSD, they get involved with other drugs and other conditions. So how do you mesh those together?
Yeah, no, you raise a lot of legitimate issues, the same concerns I have. I worry about those things too, and I think this is the question is, can we find folks who are going to really be compliant? Our guideline is to titrate the marijuana study drug precisely to a therapeutic effect. We figure out what the target symptoms are for their PTSD, whether it's insomnia, nightmares, flashbacks, things like that. We ask them to adjust the amount of marijuana they use each day to target those symptoms and not to go further, not to strive to get stoned. So certainly, I know that a lot of people are gonna be skeptical in this audience and probably think, well, you're gonna trust them to not get high each time they do that. That's part of what we're gonna be uncovering, hopefully, with this weekly reevaluation. First of all, we have a secondary verifier at their homes that are gonna be participating in confirming whether they're compliant with the protocol, whether they're, diverting study drug, things like that. And then we'll also be videotaping each of their sessions, so we'll be able to see whether they're actually using the marijuana and what physical response they're getting as they're administering the study drug at home. So we may be able to collect some of that, but I agree with you, it's a very imperfect situation. And that's part of why a lot of the critics of this study at the beginning said, we don't think this is good. We don't think you can do this at home, and that we think that home self-titration is not a workable methodology. And so we did have some critics at the beginning, but all of them came around eventually because they felt that ultimately that one of the benefits of this plant is possibly that self-titration is a legitimate treatment option for people, and that people do that every day right now. Many of them report they do it successfully in their homes.
This is, I hear what you're saying, I understood all the questions as well. I'm not really sad for the years,
Sure.
but the second part, what about the dozens of veterans who will tell you that medical marijuana does not help them? It's a gateway drug and other stuff, which is not effective. How do you study those people or accept their data? Their study?
Right, well, that's a tough thing. I mean, the good news is that NIDA has done a really good job of funding a lot of those studies already. So the National Institute of Drug Abuse has poured millions of dollars into understanding the gateway theory that you're talking about. That's not the goal. Our study is focused strictly on possible drug development. We're trying to understand, could marijuana eventually be a prescription medicine for this particular illness? So that's why we're trying to put marijuana through the entire FDA process. And the FDA did not force us to examine that issue because I think they felt that that was outside of the purview of the study.
So PTSD, trying to treat the psychic trauma,
Yeah.
trying to treat some of the different symptoms like insomnia, the flashbacks, what exactly?
What are we trying to treat?
Yeah, what's the veteran supposed to get out of this? They're gonna say that my PTSD, psychic trauma has a relief, or I have less anxiety, less aggression, less this. What is the
Right, no, I think it's all of the above. You know what I'll do is I'll send you the actual CAP scale and you'll see the battery of testing that is required. That is a very intense, measurement tool that goes over a lot of the things that you just highlighted. And the good thing is it's an independent rater. So regardless of whether it's self-report from the patient, there's still somebody independent who has no idea what that study subject is getting, who's evaluating those symptoms each week. So I think we'll be able to get a decent handle on how they're responding. No, all good questions. Thank you for that.
Did you bring any free samples?
I got nothing. No, I'm just waiting for 9 of us.
I just wanted to comment that, in Vietnam, we used to self-medicate with marijuana. And it sure would have been nice to have a pioneer such as yourself working on this issue back then, because it is really helpful, in the combat, not active combat situation, but, in downtime to treat yourself. The other thing is, most of the vets I've worked with are also using alcohol. And are you going to restrict alcohol use with your subjects?
We're gonna try, we're really gonna try. Obviously, there's a limit to what we can achieve because we don't get, 24/7 monitoring of these guys, and it's really tough to test for when they come back once a week. But we're gonna try our hardest. That's part of the informed consent and the enrollment process is to make it crystal clear to them that they're not allowed to, partake in any of these other mind-altering substances. So we hope to prevent that.
Is there any validation? Okay, there were a couple other questions, and then I'll finish. Is there any validation of any use of other substances, like drug screening?
Yes.
Yeah, and that there will be some.
Yes, there's a comprehensive urine drug screen that they'll do, not just drugs of abuse, but other, an entire panel of medicines, opiates, all of that will be tested regularly, randomly and weekly. And then we do have a secondary verifier at home. Usually it'll be a spouse or some other, roommate who is charged with monitoring them and making sure they're not using alcohol or any other street drugs. Because obviously you can't capture all, some street drugs dissipate within just a couple days and we wouldn't be able to pick that up on urine. So we're gonna have to rely on these folks, these secondary verifiers to pick that up.
And the dependent measures, if I understand the study, are all self-reported measures. Is that?
Many of them are, yeah. There's a couple.
Did you have any physiological or other?
We have the sleep activity, so that's a good use of that portable sleep study that patients can go home with. That should be a useful tool because that's something they can't alter or fake. So we'll get a good sense of their sleep architecture, how it's being affected by their daily marijuana intake. So, or maybe not daily. Remember, these guys aren't required to use marijuana daily. They're given up to 2 grams a day. Some days they may not use any, and that's one of the important things that's why we weigh the marijuana each week, their unused marijuana, because many of the vets report to me that they have some good days where they don't need any cannabis. Some of the vets only use, a puff or two at night to help initiate sleep, suppress flashbacks and nightmares. And that's it. And other vets find that they need, 2 grams or more a day to be able to be functional. So that's what we're hoping to get a handle on for what we're going to experience. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, anybody just jump in.
Well, it's a great honor to have you here in Pueblo. Where are you thinking of conducting this study?
Well, what happened is, so after we were terminated from the University of Arizona, we ended up getting this partnership with Hopkins, and so